Hello, this is Sam Kim, and I am your host for the PoliChat. In this series, we're going to be talking about current events, news, and many other topics that have occurred this summer. First up, let's bring up the elephant in the room: Charlottesville, race politics, identity politics, and how that is playing a huge role in our society. Now, the first thing that's very important is that we have a huge divide in this country right now between people who have faced discrimination, hatred in the past, and I feel that race politics or identity politics, I should say, the more politically correct term, that we need to move away from that, and that, yes, it is playing an increasing role, but we need to be more united. Whereas some people might disagree, saying that the past injustices cannot be corrected, so therefore we need to create justice now. Charlottesville. So basically, most people think it's just a bunch of white supremacists, and yes, a majority of the marchers who wanted to preserve the Robert E. Lee statue were white supremacists. But let me bring you the whole story. So the whole story started when the city council voted to remove the statue of Robert E. Lee. They renamed Lee Park Emancipation Park, and all this seems fine and good. I mean, after all, it's not unjust. This action isn't unjust because the city council, who was voted by the citizens of Charlottesville, wanted to remove the statue. So what happened was right-wing activists began to complain of revising history, rewriting history that has already occurred. And some activists like Richard Spencer, right-wing provocateurs like Richard Spencer, and others who wanted to have the Unite the Right rally, they felt that, it's not good to revise history, and that, the Confederacy happened a long time ago, and that we should remember it, and we know that Richard Spencer, yes, he is a white supremacist, and yes, he does have a lot of connections with neo-Nazis. But at the same time, there are people like me who argue that, yes, the statue of Robert E. Lee should be kept, but for different reasons. The reason why, we shouldn't get rid of these monuments is not because we want to encourage racism or bigotry. The Civil War was one of the bloodiest wars in our history. And not only that, it was a war in which Americans killed Americans. It wasn't some racist people killing other racist people. In fact, a lot of poor Southerners complained during the Civil War that it is a rich man's war. It is the rich white plantation owners that were taking, poor white farmers and forcing them to fight their conflict so that they can keep their slaves. The Union, a lot of ordinary people felt the same way. So not all the Southerners were racists and bigots. And if you look at the Civil War, we have to remember that despite the fact that a lot of the generals, a lot of the leaders were slave owners, they didn't do this primarily to defend slavery. They did it for states' rights and state sovereignty. And it is important to remember that on both sides of any conflict, there are humans. And humans ultimately share one common bond throughout history. So to remove, the statue of Robert E. Lee is to constantly reinforce this false image that all Confederate troops are evil people. No, they aren't. I mean, yes, the Confederate flag has a lot of, the Confederate flag is very taboo for understandable reasons, but not every Confederate soldier, mind you, is a racist. Now, to assume that is not really productive for this nation. But I do understand those who want to remove the statue, because the Confederate flag and the stigma that is attached to it, and all, like, you know, the hatred and bigotry that has been carried out in the name of restoring the Confederacy. I do understand, like, you know, the arguments of people on both sides. Like, you know, those reasonable people, not the neo-Nazis, but the few reasonable people that want to keep the statues in our historical places, like, you know, keeping the statues of Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, for example. They were big slave owners, but the thing is, we have to remember, that's a reminder that all people are not perfect and good human beings. So I understand, like, you know, people on the left who are saying, we gotta, like, take a step back. We gotta, like, you know, remember there's a lot of hatred, like, involved with these symbols, and I get that. But we also have to understand that historical revisionism, like revising history, is a very dangerous path to take. And to call all, like, you know, in the Revolutionary War, to call all, like, the British evil, or to call all the Confederates evil for the Civil War, that is just not productive for academic discussion. So we need to, like, you know, keep the statue as a reminder of, like, the statues of lone Confederate soldiers there and the statues of Robert E. Lee there, so that we can remember these people fought. They weren't perfect, but nevertheless they were human beings who fought for something we believed in. Now, to move on to North Korea. North Korea is another topic altogether. Basically, in the 1980s, Kim Il-sung, the first president of North Korea, decided to launch the country's first missile. In the 90s, after Kim Il-sung died, Kim Jong-il took over. Kim Jong-il enforced this policy of Songun, or military first. Okay, the famine hits in the 90s. Millions of North Koreans are malnourished. So what do? They negotiate to end their nuclear program. They get food aid. But then, in the early 2000s, they resume nuclear testing. Once they resume nuclear testing, something bad happens. What? The thing that was bad that happened was, after they resumed nuclear testing, we kept negotiating with the North Koreans, hoping that they'll come to some sort of a deal. From one side that says negotiation is still possible, it is. Of all the sanctions thus far, we reduced, like, you know, imports of seafood, we reduced hard assets, gold, silver, etc. But we didn't reduce we didn't sanction any imports of North Korean oil and coal, which are among their greatest exports. So up till now, we haven't been doing that much with sanctions. So that's the argument from those who think negotiating is possible. From the other argument, you see people who say, we've been negotiating for 20 friggin' years. For 20 years, we've been negotiating with the same people. A regime who knows what happens when you get rid of nuclear weapons. Gaddafi disbanded his nuclear weapons program. He's killed in Libya. Libya is in chaos. Iraq had a nuclear weapons program. Or not really a nuclear weapons program. They had weapons. They let UN inspectors in. The results say that they probably do have weapons. They might have weapons. We don't know. So the US goes in, topples Saddam Hussein. With North Korea, they're smart. They know that if they keep negotiating, they will lose these weapons in the future. So they keep testing and testing and testing. What does the US do? Because of all the artillery shells, artillery aimed at South Korea, we don't want to act. But the thing is, in our best national interests, and this is coming from me a South Korean who has family living in Seoul within range of these artillery attacks. It is important in our national interests to show that we as Americans, or we as the people who want denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, that we are willing to do it with whatever means necessary. Now that may mean using military force. For now, it's UN sanctions. But obviously we have the THAAD missile defense system in Japan, Alaska, Hawaii, Guam, Korea. We have the THAAD missile defense system. We have launched several carriers and ships into the Sea of Japan. We have also dispatched, we have thousands of troops in South Korea ready to launch a military, to defend against any military provocation. But in the end, we know that the North Koreans, if we retaliate, might strike Seoul. The thing is, how? Now, many scenarios for this North Korean nuclear response have come out. For example, they might send a weapon up, they'll send a pulse, which will completely destroy our power grid, so we can't respond to any of their attacks. That's scenario number one. Scenario number two, they develop a nuclear-tipped missile which can hit the West Coast as of now. Some experts are saying Chicago, but most reasonable estimates say the West Coast is now in range. Okay. 3, they attack Japan, or they launch a missile near Japan. Japan responds because under Article 9 of their constitution, they can respond. If they are attacked by a foreign power, they can declare war. So they declare war, and then we get dragged into a conflict. If these sanctions don't work, President Trump has to create a military option. H.R. McMaster, as of today, Monday, has said that we have a military option for North Korea. Although with the Trump administration, we don't know what that option is going to be precisely. But that option is on the table. So anyway, besides all this depressing news about Charlottesville, North Korea, before we get to some more news, let's talk about stuff that I thought was pretty funny over the summer. A bit controversial, but a bit funny as well. Number one, Jake Paul, we all know him. He's the famous YouTuber that, said, oh, it's every day, bro. I got the Lambo and I got all these other things. But he actually just released a popular song. It hit #1 on YouTube, the Jake Pauler song. It was great. #1 on trending. Also, we saw the Trump administration, actually considering the Paris Climate Accord, or the Paris Climate Deal, based on a report from CNN. I don't know if it's completely accurate, but I am happy to see that the Trump administration is coming back to this deal, which would actually let the U.S. regulate its own, set its own goals in terms of usage of carbon, in terms of carbon emissions. So those are two things I loved this week to see. Also, moving on to Hurricanes Harvey and Irma, this past week I submitted an op-ed or a news article or an op-ed, I don't know which, to Kaleidoscope News. It's going to be in their print edition soon, but it was talking about Hurricane Harvey and Irma. Severe Category 5 or 4 storms. They hit the southeastern part of Texas near the Gulf of Mexico. They also hit, and Hurricane Irma hit all of Florida. And when you see the devastation, it's terrible. Like, tens of thousands of homes are destroyed, damaged. Millions without power in Florida. But when you look at the response, not by government officials, like not by state or federal government, but if you look at the local initiative that's going on, that's what really unites us together. And it's really interesting to see that people in Houston coming together, like neighbors helping each other clear out the houses. You see celebrities actually getting involved, united around this. And you also see local government officials, like, you know, whether you're, regardless of your color, your creed, your political beliefs, everyone united together. And that was such a beautiful thing that happened in Houston and in the Houston area in southeastern Texas and all of Florida. Like, you know, it's something great to see, like, you know, when people come together to rebuild. And, like, you know, one organization I definitely recommend to donate to is Team Rubicon. Team Rubicon is a bunch of veterans, a group of veterans who come together, who have training with disaster relief, and they're actually in Texas and Florida doing a lot of work in terms of rebuilding, getting people evacuated, etc. And they've done such a fantastic job. I'd like to recommend Team Rubicon. Just look them up on YouTube, look them up on Google. It's a great organization, and I hope that they do a lot of great work, continue to do the great work in those areas. Now, next we have a lot to talk about in terms of regular regular news. We're talking about DACA, sanctuary cities, etc. You also so you have California trying to make itself a sanctuary state, and it's going to be very interesting to see if, like, you know, the Trump administration files a lawsuit, if you see actually, like, you know, a Supreme Court case determining whether states can defy federal orders or, like, you know, defy federal law in an extent. You're going to see a great state sovereignty case. In terms of the Supreme Court, we're also going to have a lot of interesting cases in the court this fall, one of which in particular regards, like, you know, religious freedom, in terms of this one church-run school. They want to build a playground, but they didn't receive funds from a local government because of their religious affiliation. That lawsuit is going up to the Supreme Court. You're also going to see a lot of other cases, such as the travel ban case. You're going to see go up to the Supreme Court. I don't know as of now whether that case has been settled or not, but some reports are saying that it's settled. We'll wait and see. But yeah, that is also a great case that we should look forward to. In like yesterday, day before yesterday, I believe, or this Friday, there was a London attack, a subway attack, and Theresa May said that it was that we have to, like, you know, have the military get more involved. We're doing an ongoing investigation. But Nigel Faraj responded, obviously, as he does with a lot of Theresa May's statements. He responded by saying that he's been talking about getting the military much more involved in terrorist, in terms of maintaining domestic security. He's also been talking about arming the police, not just having all these cameras. And he actually discussed this on Fox and Friends. He talked about it. I personally do not have that many opinions in the subject, so just continue the conversation in the comments below, and I'll scroll through them, go over them next week. But yeah, in terms of other news, we also have had some deadly floods in Nepal. Try to find an organization to help. If you want to get involved in any way, charities, like, just be careful. GoFundMe is typically a very good way to give to give relief to disaster victims, or to raise money. That's a great place to go. Also, another bit of news is that obviously we've done the relaunch. The relaunch trailer for the chat has come up this week. We're still in the transition process, so we're going to create a each day we're going to have different chats. So Monday would be the PoliChat, Tuesday would be food, Wednesday would be entertainment, etc. But we're going to divide, like, this time of the entire week into different shows, which you can find in our playlist. So I hope that you had a great first new episode of PoliChat. It was definitely interesting. Like, just remember, keep both sides of the argument, of any argument, intact. Make sure that you look at the perspectives on both sides of any issue, put them into context. Also, inform yourself as much as you can. Don't fall for the fake news that's on Facebook or Twitter. Don't rely on unreliable sources, but form your own informed opinions, and make sure that no one stops you from having your own opinion. And until next time, this is Sam Kim signing out. Continue the conversation. I'll see you next week.